Hi, it's Dr. Lori, and welcome back. I'm going to play Pick the Most Valuable with you. I'm so happy that you're all playing along. I know you all like it, and I'm happy that you're telling me that you like playing along. I was cracking up because I was doing a video call, and one of you folks said to me, you know, Dr. Lori, I got everybody watching with me. I got the family, I got the kids, I got the grandkids. I even have the dogs watching you. So I think that's great. Make the dogs watch the videos too. And the other thing you got to do for me, you got to share it. If you don't share it, I can't continue to do the video. So you really have to share it. I need your help with all of that. And I'm going to help you with this. So can you pick the most valuable? Those diverse types of objects that you might find in a flea market, a yard sale, or of course, a thrift store. You want to see which ones are the most valuable. I like this because this is fun because this has a lot of different things. It's not just one particular thing. I could talk about one particular thing too and give you the whole encyclopedic background on one thing. But I want you to learn when you're in that environment where you've got a lot of choices what to choose. So, let's start with this piece of end-of-day glass. This particular piece of glass is a bowl, and it has something called a ruffled collar. So a ruffled collar is basically where the perimeter, the top, usually in a vase where it has a neck and a collar, where it's decorated all the way around. This particular piece is end-of-day glass, but it is controlled. What that means is, well, it's not every single different color of the rainbow. It's particular colors that were usually left at the end of the day in the sort of hot molten glass pot. And they want to use it. They say, oh, we might as well use up this glass. Why waste this material? So they called it end of day. Now, there are a lot of people out there who go, oh, end of day, that's not true. That's just something somebody came up with. Well, you know, it is actually a term that a lot of people will use to describe this multicolored glass. End of day glass is usually glass that you're going to see in paperweights, sometimes in small little figural animals made of glass, that kind of thing. Bowls, it is also pretty common, and that's what we have here. This particular one is in that style of the Murano or the great, of course, Italian glass blowers, hand blown and cased with that, of course, white glass on the interior, which is nice to have that two-tone. What's it worth? $125 is what the end of day glass is worth. Okay. Then we got this wicker rocker. I am not big on rocking chairs, and the reason why is my hips are big. So I'm not comfortable really in a rocking chair. It's about stability for me. So basically, even when I was thin, I was not crazy about rocking chairs. But this particular rocking chair is a really nice example. Why is it a nice example? Well, a couple of things about it. It's wicker. Now, condition is good. I'd call it good, maybe fair/good, right? So the condition on this particular rocker has some damage. It can be repaired. It's got a couple of little breaks in the wicker. When you start to see that, you see that that particular piece has probably been left out in the moisture, or maybe it's been near a return or a heating vent where it's getting dry, because if wicker starts to get dry, it'll start to crack like that. This is an early 1900s chair, and one of the ways you can tell is the way in which the rockers are in fact attached, right? And the other ways that you can tell, in fact, is this curved of the seat, that it's early 1900s. So that nice curvilinear organic shape that you see of what's called the Art Nouveau period, that period that was made famous by people like Louis Comfort Tiffany and others. Wicker like this is really quite nice, made by folks like, Haywood Wakefield and others in the early 1900s, wicker furniture like this piece. It's a nice piece. It's a dark rocker and dark wicker, and it's got the crisscross decoration on it too. Value, $200. It's a nice piece. This next piece is a Yuengling beer sign. Now, you know I went to Michigan. You know I went to Penn State. I am not unfamiliar with beer. So Yuengling is the oldest actual brewery in America. And of course, Yuengling beer is pretty well known. But if you're looking for beer Anna or beer collectibles, a couple of the things that I want you to look for would be signs. This is a Yuengling beer sign. Now, Yuengling beer signs can go all the way back into the colonial period, the latter part of the 1700s, the early 1800s, because the brewery is so old. But this particular Yuengling beer sign is not that old, so it doesn't have a lot of age on it. How do you know? Because of the materials. It's lithographed tin. So that is what we typically see in the middle years of the 1900s. The earlier pieces, if you were to see sort of a tradition of Yuengling beer signs, some of the earlier ones you might see are those that are enameled, right? Ceramic. those particular beer signs, or those that were painted in the 1800s just on a piece of wood kind of thing. And if you know me, if you watch my videos, you know that even at my events, I tend to, partake in a little bit of beer. So the breweries are not lost on me. And you can watch me doing that in some of the other videos. But this particular piece is a nice example. Now, signs got really, really popular for the last 5 or 6 years. You saw people, everybody's trading a sign, a Coca-Cola sign, this sign and that sign. But in fact, these particular beer signs are seeing a dip in their popularity. Value on this one, $150 for the lithographed tin mid-20th century Yuengling beer sign. This next piece is a really nice piece, and I talk a lot about jewelry, and I talk a lot about art, and I talk a lot about furniture, and I talk about those 3 particular categories in addition to all the other stuff I talk about, because those pieces hold their value. So we'll talk about selling tips and other things in another video, but in fact, jewelry is one of the things I want you to focus on, and this particular piece is a Victorian pin, and it's called a hand pin. A couple of things about hand pins that are really kind of interesting that people don't know. Hand pins have a long history. They date back to the 1830s, 1840s. And hand pins were actually that idea of a clasp on a necklace. So you'd see a clasp on a necklace, and it actually would be a hand holding on to the other side of the necklace. It was kind of a cool thing for a clasp. Hand pins were introduced in the Victorian age after, of course, 1837 into the 1840s, and they were worn on your lapel. There were even, by the time we get into the early 1900s, these wonderful pins that are actually American Sign Language pins, and they would be for your initials. So my initial's L, so my American Sign Language pin would look like this. This particular pin that you're looking at here is a Victorian pin. They were carved in coral, they were carved in mother of pearl, they were carved in onyx and jet. Sometimes they were worn to funerals, a hand pin that would be black jet or black onyx worn to a funeral. This one is on the occasion, of course, of a marriage. And you can see that there is actually a ring on this finger, on the index finger, and that was the finger of wedlock. Basically, the index finger was the finger of wedlock, not the ring finger. Early on into the 19th century. What's interesting about this particular pin is this pin, in fact, is mother of pearl, and it has a little gold accent, and they'd even do a decoration in carving of the cuff of the hand. Really beautifully made. Value on this pin, $90. It's a wonderful example of Victoriana and the way in which we see these natural forms like forms of the human body coming into jewelry design. This next piece is a Lenox Shoe. It's made by the Lenox company, and of course it is bone china, and it has 22 karat gold banding or gilt around the actual perimeter. Now, shoes are really important. I think shoes are very important. I love shoes, and I always wore flats. I was tall enough, my family would say, and my boyfriends thought that I didn't need to have big high heels. I don't know if I'd be too stable on big high heels, but I always wore flats. So flats were the thing for me. I wouldn't have worn a shoe like this Lenox shoe, but I like shoes. I have a little bit of a thing for shoes. I like shoes, and I like expensive shoes. So this particular, I think you should make sure that your feet are comfy. So this particular piece, getting back to this one, is a Lenox shoe. You notice that it's white, and you notice that it is actually embossed or decorated. So the mold that it goes into, this bone china Lenox shoe, is in fact for knickknacks. So it would sit in a curio cabinet or on a shelf, that kind of thing. They were very popular in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s at weddings. Why? Because shoes associate with prosperity. Because it was thought at weddings that you would actually throw a shoe at the bride and groom. The idea was that if you could either get a shoe associated with the bride and groom, that they would have a prosperous life. A lot of brides would also put a penny in her shoe when she walks down the aisle, hoping again for prosperity and good wealth during her marriage. This particular Lenox shoe dates to the middle years of the 1900s. Value on it, $55. They're collectible, but again, not high values for the Lenox versions. It's a nice piece. They're white and usually, again, gifts at weddings. This next object that you can pick if it's the most valuable is a World's Fair board game. So the World's Fair, I never went to a World's Fair, so I don't know, but everybody would be like, oh, it's great, it's World's Fair. I have appraised a lot of stuff from World's Fairs. Oh my gosh, wonderful things. I remember the Jim Beam bottle from the Seattle World's Fair in 1962. And I've appraised, of course, the collectible souvenir egg from the World Columbian Exposition. It was a puzzle egg of 1893. Lots of World's Fair stuff. The 1904, they would give out hatchets with George Washington's head on it from the 1904 World's Fair. And did you know that the 1904 World's Fair is where ice cream cones were invented? Well, they were. So anyway, I got to get to my next World's Fair, I guess. This was a World's Fair board game from the World's Fair of 1939, which was held in New York City. And it's Betty and Bobby's trip to the World's Fair. So the idea of the game was for you to sort of go along on this trip with them. And the board relates to and shows you an image, an illustration, if you will, of the mall or all the different buildings and all the different attractions that were at the World's Fair. So like at the 1893 World Columbian Exposition Fair in Chicago, they had the Ferris wheel. That was the introduction of the Ferris wheel. And at the 1876 World's Fair, they had the torch of the Liberty, of the Liberty, Statue of Liberty, those kinds of things. So at this particular World's Fair, they had, of course, the industry buildings and the arts buildings, and they had great innovations in technology and, of course, in industrialization. So this particular board game is popular, and it's popular for a couple of reasons, right? So when you're thinking about most valuable, or when you're picking the most valuable, think about categories and think about how many people will be attracted to this particular object, this particular antique or collectible, based on those collectors. So collectors who say, hey, I'm interested in World's Fair, and I'm interested in toys, and I'm interested in games, and I might be interested in this idea of the entrance into the 1940s, right? All of those things are going to be important. All those people. And the more people you can attract to your object, the more valuable. So this might be the one where you're saying, oh, okay, I'm playing along with Dr. Lori, pick the most valuable. Anytime I can attract more than one potential buyer to an object, it's worth more. So the game's in pretty good condition. The games that we had at our house were never in very good condition. We used them pretty hard, you know, like the board games that are here on the set, like the Masterpiece game, which happens to be my favorite childhood game. And of course the Elsie game, which actually is a contemporary game with the World's Fair board game. Now, this particular board game is in nice condition, and it does have all of its parts, and you need all of those particular pieces to the game. When you're looking at the flea market or the yard sale, look around, because maybe those pieces got into another game. So if there's 3 or 4 games at the yard sale or at the thrift store, look through the other games to see if you're missing the dice or something else. So you want to think about that. Value on this one, this board game from the World's Fair, $200. It's really a nice collectible. This piece is a Bullion Cup. So do you recognize it? It's made in Japan by Noritake. The Muramura brothers mark is on this particular cup. And how do you know it's a Bullion Cup? Well, it's got 2 handles. I know a lot about bouillon because I drink a lot of hot things. I drink hot tea and hot bouillon. I drink a lot of it to try to quell the anger that is my stomach. I'm hungry always. I try hard to lose weight. It's definitely the struggle of my life, but I have been blessed in other ways. But anyway, so a lot of bouillon. Bouillon I usually don't drink out of cups. Today we use mugs. But in the early years of the 20th century, bouillon cups like these were pretty desirable, and they usually would be part of a large service of dinnerware. So you'd have bouillon cups with 2 handles. So if you have this china and you're saying to yourself, what are those 2-handled cups for? They look like teacups with 2 handles. They're for broth or for bouillon. And that's what this is. This is a bouillon cup that goes with a larger set from the middle part of the 1900s. And it has, of course, some details of gilt, some little gold gilt areas on it. And it's also, of course, hand detailed. It's molded, it's made in Japan, middle part, after World War II, and value on the Noritake Bullion Cup, it's pretty nice. It's worth $45. So, couple of tips about, of course, when you're trying to pick the most valuable. Remember, condition is always king. I'm always looking for quality. Value, of course, comes in many ways, shapes, and forms. And when next time you're at the thrift store, the flea market, or the antique shop, I want you to think about these tips, and I want you to think about, how do I pick the most valuable? Continue to watch with all of your friends and family. I'm Dr. Lori. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to share.